Okay, so Marxism 2, the second narrative summary of Marxist concepts I'm going to do for y'all. This time around, I'm going to break this particular screencast video up into maybe 10-minute sections because it took so long last time to upload the previous video. So for this one, I'm going to focus on the labor theory of value. It's a very, very important aspect of Marxist theory. In fact, it's indispensable to understanding Marxist theory as a whole. And I'll also do a host of other things. I'll discuss the base superstructure relation in the next screencast video lecture. The idea that subjectivity for Marx is a product of the economic structure of human societies. Remember, this contrasts with psychoanalytic theory and its conception of the origins of subjectivity, which it locates in the interpersonal, mainly in the family, the relationship between mother, father, child, siblings, and so on and so forth. If siblings are present within the family structure, and later on in another screencast video lecture, I'll talk about Marx's concept of history as a product of class struggle, which he articulates most clearly in the Communist Manifesto, which some of you may have read, and perhaps with a certain degree of difficulty, as I did when I was first exposed to it in college or university. And then we'll do another screencast video lecture discussing the relationship between literature or human culture. Remember, literature is an aspect of human culture and ideology. And then if you can understand these ideas as part and parcel of a complex whole or theory, then you should be able to more accurately understand how Marx's ideas help to lay the foundations for the remaining units that we're going to be doing, which is to say feminism, deconstruction, eco-criticism, and then finally post-colonialism, which I don't mention in this particular essay, but we'll be doing that this semester as well. So Marx's labor theory of value. I'm going to start by invoking a play by the late great historian Howard Zinn, who wrote The People's History of the United States, and a great progressive thinker, and thought a great deal about Marx. He wrote a bunch of plays. Wasn't the greatest playwright, but his plays are entertaining, very informative, and quite educational. I've taught Marx in Soho in various other iterations of English 216 before. Unfortunately, we didn't have time for it this semester, but maybe I can give you a link to the actual play. I believe the university has a electronic copy of the play, and also I'm going to search around and see if there's actually a performance of Marx and Soho. I brought in a guy by the name of Bob White for several years running. Unfortunately, can't bring him this year, but he's performed that play, and he's a good friend, and it's quite an experience to be able to see him perform Marx and Soho. Really short play, effective, dramatic, and pretty good at conveying some of Marx's more abstract ideas. And in this particular scene, I'm going to read off to y'all. His wife Jenny is portrayed as kind of making fun of Carl for being, overly abstract and too academic in the way that he theorizes or articulates his theories. So, in Marx and Soho, Howard Zinn imagines Marx in a sort of comical domestic dispute with his wife Jenny, who complains that his writings are unnecessarily abstruse or difficult to understand, especially his formulation of his surplus theory of value, okay, which for our purposes is more or less one and the same with the labor theory of value. And he responds exasperatedly, no one can understand it, which is to say the surplus theory of value, without first understanding the labor theory of value, and how labor power is a special commodity whose value is determined by the cost of the means of subsistence and yet gives value to all other commodities, a value which always exceeds the value of labor power. Jenny wittily responds that his formulation is unduly opaque or unclear, and she says, no, that won't do. Well, all you have to say is this: your employer gives you the barest amount in wages, just enough for you to survive and work, which, for our purposes, we can refer to as the cost of subsistence, which the bourgeoisie always needs to keep as low as possible to keep the overall cost of production down. So that increases their surplus value, which is, say, their profit. But out of your labor, he makes far more than what he pays you. And so he gets richer and richer while you stay poor. So the feminist in me sides with Jenny on this one. Indeed, Marx's language sounds a touch too academic, uh, as though he were trying to impress his buddies with the range and depth of his intellect. So macho. But they've both got it right in their own way. Remember that for Marx, the proletariat is the main producer of value or economic wealth in capitalist societies. Remember, Marx has a very particular understanding and conception of value. All right. Uh, and so without the proletariat or the working class, commodities wouldn't get produced. They're paid a wage, determined by the capitalist as the cost of subsistence, or how much money it takes to reproduce the labor power required to create use values in the sphere of production that pales in comparison to the surplus value or money or profit that ultimately falls in the hands of capitalists at the end of a business cycle. Now, remember, this is really important, that surplus value is equal to net exchange value minus the cost of production, the cost of machinery, materials, maintenance of machinery, and wages. Okay. The reasons as to why the capitalist is able to extract so much value from the combined labor power of the proletariat are complex, but for the sake of simplicity, all you need to know for now is that the capitalist is able to dictate the proletariat's wages because the latter is born into the world without capital. In other words, without money, property, land, machines, which gives them a tremendous amount of power, right? And also, I think it's important to remember that for Marx, when he's referring to capital, he's also referring to money, property, land, machines, other things like that. Those things that give the capitalist or the bourgeoisie disproportionate and overwhelming power vis-a-vis in relation to the working class, right? So the proletariat's power consists solely in his body's power or capacity to mix his labor with natural or material resources to produce use values, which Marx defines and also Tyson defines as an object of utility. Remember, a use value refers to that aspect of a commodity that does something. So this shirt covers me. A wool sweater keeps me warm in the wintertime. This computer allows me to be able to communicate to you via cyberspace, right, from my room to teach you about Marxist theory, right? So that's what that computer does, among many other things, right? So use values refer to that aspect of a commodity that does something, performs some type of action, right? Uh, so the contract the proletariat makes with the capitalist is to produce use values, which is to say ultimately commodities, which the latter purchases by paying him a wage. Okay, so since the capitalist owns the use values the proletariat produces in exchange for a wage, it is his right to attach an exchange value or a price to the commodities created in the base. Remember, the base refers to the sphere of production, the social relations of production, this asymmetrical power dynamic between the bourgeoisie, the haves, and the proletariat, the have-nots, right? Uh, in the marketplace for money. Since wages are depressed by the capitalist to an absolute legal minimum, because he wants to keep the cost of production as low as possible, the surplus value the capitalist earns tends to be staggeringly, for Marx, immorally large at the end of a business cycle, say in comparison with the total wages the capitalist pays out to the proletariat. Thus, to paraphrase Jenny, the capitalist gets not only rich, but richer, while the working class remains poor. Now, just look at the contemporary situation here in 2020. In the United States, since the 1970s, wages have remained stagnant while the cost of living has gone up considerably. Meanwhile, the wealthy have become super wealthy as economic disparities between the dominant class and the middle and working class become more and more acute. To get a more accurate picture as to why this has become the case, both in the United States and across the globe, we should take a look at the base superstructure relation, which largely explains how the bourgeoisie uses the tremendous amounts of surplus value it extracts from the labor power of the proletariat to invest it in social and political institutions that work to maintain the uneven power relationship between themselves and the proletariat, right? And by the uneven power relationship that I'm referring to the social relations of production. In order for the capitalist to uh, be able to extract tremendous amounts of value from the labor power of the proletariat, the uneven power dynamic, that asymmetrical power dynamic between the bourgeoisie, the dominant class, and the proletariat has to remain uneven. They have to maintain the stability of the social relations of production. Otherwise, their surplus value runs the risk of going down. Okay, so I think that's enough for this particular lecture. In the next one, I'll discuss the base superstructure relation.